Senior Director for European Affairs at the National Security Council. What's particularly terrific about this speaker is, A, she can really report to us on what's going on at the summit, and will give us our first readout from the White House, from the administration, on what's been taking place and what's been decided, to the extent that she can report that already. On the other hand, she's also one of the greatest experts I know on NATO, NATO's history, and so she can also put into context what we've all been talking about. We're very grateful she's here. You can only imagine how busy she must be, since she has to be by the President's side through most of these meetings. And with this in mind, my introduction will be very short, and we'll get right to your questions after a couple of opening comments she'll make. This is the second time Liz has served in the executive branch. From 1994 and 96, during the first Clinton administration, she was Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia. She was instrumental in extending NATO's Partnership for Peace program across Eurasia, and in building the foundation for cooperation between Russia and NATO, so she can also talk about that in the joint peacekeeping operation in Bosnia. Has done a lot of thinking about the NATO relationship with Russia. So without further ado, I'm going to turn to Liz Sherwood-Randall. Please give her a very warm welcome.
Good morning. I'm very happy to be here. I have to say I was once a young Atlanticist. Now I'm just an Atlanticist, but very proud to be one, and very exciting to get to talk with all of you this morning about what we're doing here at the summit. I'll give you a little perspective on how we got here, and then describe the key events and what we hope to achieve. Little more than 2 months after President Obama became president, he traveled to Strasbourg-Kiel for the NATO summit, the 60th anniversary summit. And at that summit, he set forth what he wanted us to do with our most important security alliance, and that was, as he said, we cannot be content to merely celebrate the achievements of the 20th century or enjoy the comforts of the 21st century. We must learn from the past to build on its success. We must renew our institutions, our alliances. We must seek the solutions to the challenges of this young century. And looking out at you today, I have to say, you, the young people of this alliance, will be the ones who will inherit this charge. From the start of the administration, revitalizing our alliances and partnerships has been a foundational element of our work. And I want to acknowledge General Jones, who I think is somewhere in the audience, for the leadership that he provided to us as we set ourselves on this course. The President has repeatedly said that NATO is the most successful alliance in human history, and together we have faced challenges that none could face alone. He views NATO as a unique American asset, and as an asset to every country that is a member and a partner of this alliance. At Lisbon in 2010, the President asked us to recapture NATO's potential and focus it on the future. As you know, in Lisbon, there were a number of achievements. France rejoined NATO's military command structures. Allies agreed on a clear process for the transition of security in Afghanistan, and we defined the critical 21st century defense capabilities that NATO requires. Most important, we agreed on a new strategic concept, which is like a mission statement for the alliance in the 21st century. And that brings us to today. Let me describe to you what we've done thus far and what we expect to achieve in the next few hours here in Chicago. The summit opened yesterday with an arrival ceremony just next door in McCormick Place. The President and the Secretary General stood on a stage and greeted each of your leaders individually. And then they moved into the first session, which focused, at the President's request, on NATO's defense capabilities. The key message the President presented to his allies in that session was that we have a package of defense deliverables that we have agreed upon for this summit called NATO Forces 2020, which demonstrate that this alliance is genuinely greater than the sum of its parts. We have been able to transfer command and control for NATO missile defense to NATO. This is called declaring interim capability. We have purchased as an alliance a number of Global Hawk unmanned aerial vehicles to provide intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance for the alliance. We have a set of smart defense deliverables which allow allies to pool and share capabilities in an age of austerity. We've agreed on Baltic air policing to provide that kind of capability to the Baltic states so that they don't need to purchase their own fighter aircraft, and a number of other elements. But the President said this is not enough, and so I want to underscore this. He said this is a very good first step, but there is much more to do. If we want to ensure that this alliance will be fully capable of meeting 21st century threats, each of our countries must continue to invest in defense, and each must make hard choices, as the United States did in its defense review earlier this year, about where we put our defense funds, because all of us have legacy systems and commitments to the kind of defense capabilities that may not be relevant to the challenges of the present and the future, but may be legacies of the past. So he challenged our allies to pursue NATO Forces 2020, and when we meet again at our next summit, to ensure that we have carried this forward. After that session, there was a brief break, and then the President welcomed all of his allied colleagues at a beautiful dinner at Soldier Field, which is the football stadium that was built in Chicago to honor those who were lost to the United States in World War I. And because of the commitment over the decades of NATO by all of our militaries to serve and in some cases to sacrifice their lives in the interests of our common security, we wanted to hold this dinner at Soldier Field. And so the Allies gathered together there last night to have an intimate conversation, just with leaders and one advisor each, on the future of our commitment in Afghanistan. And that discussion last night focused principally on what role the alliance will play after 2014. After we have completed our combat mission in Afghanistan, what will NATO do to sustain the investment it has made and continue to support the Afghan people? And a number of decisions were taken last night with regard to the future of NATO's role in Afghanistan. This morning, the leaders are meeting now in another session, a much larger session. So last night they met on Afghanistan, 28 allies and the Secretary General. This morning they have gathered in the International Security Assistance Force meeting, which just got underway, and that includes 63 nations and the United Nations and the European Union. And they are meeting to discuss the completion of the transition process that the allies agreed to at Lisbon, and that will lead us to the end of 2014. And they are agreeing on a plan for ensuring that the transition takes place in a deliberate way so that the Afghan forces can increasingly be in the lead and allies can be in a training and advising and supporting role. So they will be discussing that as we speak, in fact, and they'll conclude that session about noontime. At 11 o'clock, the foreign ministers of NATO will leave the ISAF session, and they will gather in a separate meeting with the heads of state representing the countries that aspire to NATO membership. This was a very important session for us at this summit to indicate that although at this summit no new members will be welcomed into NATO, NATO's door remains open to those countries that develop the structures that are necessary and meet the requirements for NATO membership. And so a number of countries will be meeting with the Allied foreign ministers this morning to talk about the path to membership. After those sessions are concluded, there will be another break. There will be some bilateral discussions, and the President will also have an opportunity to see the leaders of the 3 Baltic states that are here in Chicago. And we will then move into our final session of the summit, which is an unprecedented event that the President asked us to create. We have noted in our experience in this administration the critical role that capable partners are playing in the alliance. And I know a number of you represent countries that are not members, but rather partners to NATO. We saw in the Libya operation last year, for example, that partners from the Gulf states and Sweden and others played very important roles in the implementation of the UN resolution in providing both for the strike mission and also for the no-fly zone over Libya. In addition, of course, in Afghanistan and also in Kosovo, in KFOR, there are key contributions made by partners. So the President asked us to find a way to recognize those partners who make a significant difference in NATO operations. What he wanted to do was incentivize continuing cooperation by partners and to encourage NATO to develop new mechanisms for incorporating partners more fully into alliance activities. And so there I'm previewing for you something that hasn't yet been agreed, but it's my expectation that at this partners meeting this afternoon, there will be agreement that the NATO Secretary General should work to develop new modalities, new mechanisms, new processes. Those sound very bureaucratic as words. New ways is a better way of putting it. New ways of bringing partners who have the political will and the military capabilities to contribute meaningfully to alliance operations into the alliance in a way that allows them to have more input into policy development and into conduct of operations and into the after-action process of evaluating how we did in an operation and doing the lessons learned that are necessary to increase alliance capabilities going forward, including the development of important interoperability with our partners. Then, at the end of that session, there will be press conferences. The NATO Secretary General will speak. And finally, the President will hold a press conference. And then he will be off to Joplin, Missouri, where tonight, after all of this summitteering, he's going to give the commencement address at Joplin High School 1 year after the tornado that wiped out the town, including the high school. So I think with that preview, I'm going to sit down and Fred and I are going to have a conversation and take your questions.
Liz, thank you very much for that. And because we've gone back and forth in different sessions, I just want to make clear we're actually conversing here on record, right? In your comments.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This is a tweet-happy group.
Ah. I am not allowed to tweet. We investigated that, but unfortunately, the White House Blackberries are disabled for such activities. So
well,
in fact, I can receive a text message, but I can't text you back.
There you go. That's the first insight into the workings of the summit. So because you have monitored the history of NATO and really know this as well as anybody I know and have been involved in past summits, we know the historic importance of the first Washington summit, of the Prague summit, where General Jones played such a crucial role, of the Lisbon summit, the new strategic concept. How might history record this summit? What's important here in a historical sense?
Well, that's such a good question. 20 years ago, my doctoral dissertation was published as a book called Allies in Crisis, Meeting Global Challenges to Western Security. This was before the end of the Cold War. And we could not have anticipated that the world would be as it is today, with NATO principally focused on what were then called out-of-area operations. And with most of Europe free and secure, and many of the states that emerged from the breakup of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact NATO members. I would say what's significant about this summit in that context is that we are increasingly seeing NATO emerge as the hub of a network of global security partnerships. And that is not questioned or challenged. There's no debate among allies about whether that's a legitimate purpose for NATO. There is a recognition that while we are a regionally based alliance, the threats we face are global, and that there is enormous value to the alliance, both in having a strategic perspective on challenges beyond Europe and in planning to meet those challenges together, but also to incorporating, as I mentioned in the session we will have with the 13 partners, partners who have the will and capacity to make meaningful contributions to NATO as a matter of course.
So in that respect, it's really going to be that part of the meeting, the third aspect. Afghanistan, obviously important, capabilities, obviously important, but that's dealing with the present tense and what we're looking at the moment, while the third part of it is more about this hub of...
I would say that when you asked me what will be remembered, what will be the enduring legacy, we have much work we are agreeing to complete on Afghanistan. But I think in terms of thinking about what this summit will mark for the alliance, as I said, there has never been a session like this before at a summit.
Yeah.
And it really sets the alliance on a course of increasing its engagement and increasing the ways in which partners can contribute substantially to the alliance.
Okay. Thank you. So let me go right to the delegates. They're a group that asks questions that are sometimes very
Pointed.
Very pointed.
Good.
So
please identify yourselves. Tell me where you come from.
Yeah.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Randall, and thank you so much for your time and coming here to speak with us. My name is Mark Sorrell, and I'm a Young Atlanticist delegate from the United States based here in Chicago. And my question is a broader strategic issue building off of one of the points that you had made about NATO being a hub for global partnerships going forward on security. There's been a lot of talk within the administration from Assistant Secretary Bremer and others about this kind of hub and spoke model of regionalizing security operations and partnerships. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit, not just about what you said about NATO being this sort of hub, but how it serves as a beacon of other hubs elsewhere, what those hubs might be, and what the implications or concrete examples would be of how they would affect and shape the security environment in those other areas of the world.
So I think that the way in which we need to think about this is we look to those who have the capacity to contribute when we identify a joint project. And whether we're talking about our Asian partners like Australia or South Korea or the Japanese in Afghanistan, whether we're talking about the mission, as I mentioned, in Libya, where we had Gulf states requesting NATO command and control, or whether we're talking about partnerships with international organizations, like the work that NATO does with the European Union every day in Kosovo and elsewhere, we're looking at capacity. And what we find is that it is often better for the practice to inform the theory. So what we do together helps us then figure out what kind of structures need to be built, but it's based on actually doing rather than talking about it. And so that's why we've chosen to lift up those who have made meaningful contributions to NATO in the last couple of years to indicate that there's real benefit and opportunity to those who step forward and want to cooperate with NATO.
And in that respect, to what extent is Libya a one-off, and to what extent is Libya a model?
Well, every case is unique, of course, and Libya had unique attributes. But the example that was set in Libya, that many countries requested integration into NATO command and control, recognizing that you could not conduct an air operation with numerous air forces without having unified command and control, signaled recognition by a number of countries that had never before participated in a NATO operation that this unique asset that the alliance has, which is a standing integrated military command structure, multinational participation in that command structure, provided the vehicle through which many countries could participate with the alliance in an operation.
Thank you very much. Please.
Sadiq Amini, Fulbright scholar from Afghanistan. I have two questions, madam, for you. The first is, since you're working on European affairs, is about the Nabucco project, the pipeline. It seems that nobody cares about it anymore. Russia is taking the lead in that, and in order to secure Europe from the energy perspective, that project needs to be considered. And if you can say, what's the U.S. stand on that? That's the first question. The second is the NATO. We have seen previously in the past any operation that has been going on, the U.S. is taking lead and then the NATO follows. However, what happens after Afghanistan is over? Would we see NATO as a global security framework for the whole world, where the NATO decides where they go and the nations, doesn't matter which nation, specifically the United States, follow, no matter if it is important for the national security interest?
I think I followed that second question. I think I'll take that one first. Correct me if I didn't understand you properly. First of all, one of the outcomes of this summit will be the enduring commitment of allies to Afghanistan. So post-2014, when the combat mission ends, there is going to be a sustained level of effort to support your security forces in securing your country. And there will also be a significant amount of development assistance, which will be discussed at a conference in Tokyo this summer. With regard to NATO's global role, one of the important aspects of NATO is because it is a multinational organization, it has the discipline that there has to be consensus among all allies before action is taken, and that confers legitimacy upon its actions. That is, we don't act alone in NATO. We work to build consensus with allies, and when it involves activities with partners, we do that as well. And we act with UN authorization, as we did in Libya. So this would not be seen as a vehicle for imposing America's will around the world, but more important, a vehicle for achieving consensus among an increasingly broad group of countries about what is to the mutual benefit of all the countries that participate to advance security and stability around the world. On Nabucco, our policy is to increase the options for Europeans to have access to energy, and that is to promote European energy security. And we have been very supportive of a variety of initiatives, all of which require private sector funding, and so they have to be viable commercially in order to succeed. And we have worked very closely with our allies and partners across Eurasia to expand options for energy security.
Thank you. Please.
Hello. Thank you very much for speaking to us today. My name is Ruben Diaz-Plaja. I'm from Spain and the Netherlands. I was wondering if you could speak a bit to the policy challenge of Ukraine. I know that you've worked on Russian-Eurasian issues in the past, and it's a particularly puzzling problem at the moment, I think, for a number of reasons. We're seeing very erratic behavior by President Yanukovych, in particular some rather worrying behavior in regards to political pluralism. To what extent and how should the Euro-Atlantic community address this, and particularly through NATO partnership structures with Ukraine? I'd be interested to know that.
Thank you for the question. It is of significant concern that I have responsibility for Ukraine at the White House, and the President actually spoke in Seoul when we were there for the Nuclear Security Summit in April with President Yanukovych, specifically about our concerns about the treatment of Tymoshenko, about the selective prosecution of political figures, and more generally about our concerns about the trajectory of Ukrainian democracy. And we have worked very closely with our European Union partners to have a joint approach to Ukraine to try to increase incentives for Ukraine to make decisions that are consistent with democratic practice, and to, where necessary, to put pressure on Ukraine to cease its behavior. Unfortunately, President Yanukovych does not seem to see that there is much more for Ukraine to lose than to gain from his current course of action. And indeed, we have, in the last few days, as the President was at Camp David with some of his European counterparts, he had a conversation with Chancellor Merkel about the Yanukovych treatment of Tymoshenko, because the Germans have been very proactive in trying to secure sufficient medical attention for Mrs. Tymoshenko, and we'll continue to coordinate very closely because that's our best leverage, though, as I said, there as yet has not been a recognition of all that Ukraine will lose if it chooses to go down a different path.
Please, back to the middle.
Good morning, ma'am. My name is Jordan Becker. I'm from the United States. I was really happy to hear your comment about practice informing institutions and mechanisms. And so my question for you is, as our presence in Afghanistan diminishes to some extent, the mission changes, what opportunities do you see for maintaining the significant gains we've made in terms of interoperability with allies and with partners? And what opportunities do you see for extending that interoperability and actually making this notion of a hub of global security function in a way that's effective in the absence of major deployments like Afghanistan?
So this is an enormously important project for us because we have developed significant interoperability with a number of allies and partners in Afghanistan, and we don't want to lose that as troops come home. And in the context of our defense review and the decisions about our force posture in Europe, we have committed, and the President stated this yesterday in his intervention in the first meeting, the North Atlantic Council meeting on defense capabilities, he stated our commitment to have a rotational deployment of a battalion that will come through Europe regularly to work on precisely this project, which is to ensure that we enhance interoperability, we build on the lessons we've learned in Afghanistan, But I would also add that there are other capabilities that we have not focused on because of the specificity of the requirements in Afghanistan. And so one of the things that we want to do is take a step back and look at the full spectrum of capabilities allies need to sustain, and to make sure that as we do this training going forward, we build up those elements which have not been priorities in our work together in Afghanistan.
You're down to your last 5 minutes here, and I know you need to get to other meetings. Why don't I pick up these three questions that the people are asking? And if you can give your questions one after another, and then we'll go for a final round here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Amy Peel from the United States. I have a question. You talked a lot about partnerships and looking at partnerships. When you start talking about working with different organizations internationally, when you look at things like the GCC and the League of Arab States and cooperating with the Libya question, how exactly does the United States look at still moving in that direction? And a kind of a part B, what kind of message does it send to the United States when we see a lack of one of our most strategic partners being Russia, and yet we don't see President Putin attending either the G8 summit or being here in Chicago as well? So if you could please comment on that.
That gives us a good chance to talk about Russia, please.
Hi, Andrea Baumann. I'm a Young Atlanticist. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Where are you from?
From Switzerland. You referred to the Obama administration's efforts to lead a deliberate transition in Afghanistan. Now, from the outside, a lot of people can't help seeing this as a rush to the exit. And I was wondering whether you could tell us in what way the deliberations of the last 2 days could counter that perception, if at all.
And just so you know, we have, I think, of our Young Atlanticist group, I think 52 from 35 countries, so including
Fabulous.
7 partners. So please.
Yes, thank you for being here. I'm Nathan Dorn from the United States. You talked briefly that Ukraine was in your area, and we had the president of Georgia here yesterday, and we debated whether or not Georgia was in Europe or whether Georgia was not with Europe, and he said they were grouped with the Balkans. So I was just wondering if you could comment, as Georgia looks to join NATO, whether or not Georgia is in fact in Europe or not.
Yeah, let me also tell you what President Saakashvili said more precisely. I think it's a very good question. He said it was more difficult for us potentially to be members when we were paired with Ukraine, but now that we're one of 4 candidate members and the other 3 are Balkan countries and they're likely to get in at some point, this improves our opportunity. And then at the first day, Secretary General Rasmussen, when asked what are the conditions for Georgia to get in, focused very much on Georgia's next elections. So just for the background of what's been discussed here so far.
Thank you. So on partnerships first, the session this afternoon, as I mentioned, will, I believe, result in a tasking, that's the formal word that's used at NATO, by leaders to the NATO Secretary General to work on developing new ways for partners to contribute to the alliance as it plans for its missions from the inception to the execution. And that should involve all partners who have the political will and the military capacity to contribute. That includes Russia, and there I would underscore the ongoing efforts that we have made to develop a constructive relationship between NATO and Russia. I was actually involved in the initial work on that in the 1990s at the Pentagon, and it's something that we are very committed to today. The fact that President Putin decided not to come to the G8 summit and the NATO summit has more to do with what is going on internally in Russia than us. I think it's important to note that that's our assessment of his decision. He indicated to Secretary General Rasmussen, it's now, I'm trying to think how long ago it was, last month at some point, that he did not want to be invited to the NATO summit. He felt that the timing was not good for him. And subsequently, he indicated that he couldn't come to the G8 summit. That reflects his effort to put a government in place, and we are prepared to continue the work that we're doing in the NATO-Russia Council to identify opportunities for meaningful cooperation with Russia. We actually are doing a substantial amount with Russia in Afghanistan. Russia provides very important transit. The Northern Distribution Network to move material in and out of Afghanistan runs through Russia, and Russia is being represented at the meeting that we are holding right now, the International Security Assistance Force meeting. let's see, next question was rush to the exits. No, there is no rush to the exits. The set of agreements that will come out of this summit on Afghanistan, I'll try to summarize for you briefly. The first is that NATO will achieve a milestone at some point in 2013 in which the transition to Afghan security force lead will be significant. And the idea there is to ensure that we move deliberately toward our supporting the Afghans in defending their own country rather than our being in a leading role. So that transition doesn't result in what I would call a falling off the cliff at the end of 2014, but rather that we have a process in place to ensure that province by province, and indeed in the operations we're conducting, that the Afghans are increasingly playing a leading role. Second, this summit will agree on a major commitment to funding of the Afghan national security forces post-2014. Now, this is not a summit which was a pledging summit or a donors conference, but a number of allies and partners have stepped forward to make substantial contributions in advance, a pledge essentially to supporting the ANSF post-2014. Those countries include Australia, the United Kingdom, Germany, and others. And together there will be a significant demonstration of a will to support the ANSF so that a sustainable ANSF exists at a level that is appropriate to Afghanistan's needs after 2014. And finally, I believe this summit will agree on a post-2014 role for NATO in Afghanistan that will not be a combat mission, but will be a role that will continue in training, advising, and assisting Afghan security forces as they take control of their country entirely. So I think that we can see set forth something very different from a rush for the exits, but rather allied unity in staying the course in Afghanistan and ensuring that the investment, the enormous investment of blood and treasure that allies and partners have made in Afghanistan is to the benefit both of Afghanistan and all those who have made that investment in the future. And finally, question about Georgia. Is Georgia in Europe? We look at the Eurasian landmass as a very inclusive one, and it is really by virtue of the choices countries make with regard to democratization, as you indicated, with regard to the relationships they want to establish, how they define themselves. And Georgia clearly is westward oriented and has participated very substantially in Afghanistan, will indeed grow its contribution in Afghanistan, is participating in a number of other activities with us. And I think Georgia fully sees itself as a European nation and desires increasing integration with Europe, as is evidenced by its relationship both with the EU and its desire to become a NATO member.
Thank you. On behalf of the audience, Elizabeth Sherwood-Randall, Special Assistant to the President, Senior Director for European Affairs. It's terrific. I know how hard a summit like this is for someone like you. It's terrific that you took the time. Thank you so much.
I want to thank all of you for what you're doing, because this alliance will depend on you in the future. First of all, this alliance depends on public support, of course, because we are all democracies and it's necessary to have our public sustain our foreign policy commitments. But as we hand the baton over, it will be necessary to have young people who take that baton and run forward with it. And you will have ideas that will innovate further on what we have achieved, and you will be the future of this alliance. So I want to thank you for being here, and I encourage you to continue to do the work you're doing. The lesson that I have learned in my years in government service, the most important lesson I've learned is that the hardest problems are the most worth working on. And I would add, as a corollary to that, that individuals can really make a difference. That is, individuals putting their minds and their hearts to hard problems can change the world. Thank you very much.
And because you, yep. In that vein, and I know you have to leave, the next thing that comes on, and please stay in your seats, is General Jones and Ellen Tauscher and Barry Pavel are going to announce a new initiative within the Scowcroft Center, which we've created, for future generations. So this will not be a one-off meeting. it really will become a network that's ongoing. So again, thanks very much to Liz, and hold your seats.
Fabulous. Thank you.